Hello and welcome to episode 189 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. I'm so excited for today's show because my good friend and co-host Sarah Says is returning to the podcast. She has a very, very busy life, and the fact that she's making sure that she can set aside some time to be on the podcast over the next 2 months is so gracious of her. We have already written 4 total recording sessions in the day planner in pen for September and October. Today, we're going to start a 2-episode conversation about The Little Mermaid. This November will mark the 35th anniversary of the original animated feature from Disney. This movie is significant for the nostalgia of a lot of our listeners' Disney fandoms, and it may be even more important for being the start of the famed Disney Renaissance. Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. It only takes a few seconds, and it makes it possible for us to continue doing what we have been doing for over 3.5 years. If you're already subscribed, make sure to watch videos, comment with something positive, and drop a like as well. Share the channel with your friends who love theme parks. We are 11 weeks away from our 200th episode, and I would love to make a significant jump in subscribers by that point. Right now, let's get started with our main conversation. Welcome back, Sarah.
I am so excited to be back on the show.
I have told everybody there is no problem between Sarah and myself. She is still excited to be on the podcast, and whenever we can get her, she is going to be here. So we are so excited to have her returning, and this is going to be a really great topic, I think. I'm really excited for this one. Coming
this
up,
is going to be a good one.
on November 17th, we will be celebrating the 35th anniversary of The Little Mermaid. And that is huge for so many different reasons, a lot of them that we are going to discuss over the next, my guess is, 2 episodes. But we're just going to start right now with the 1989 film. 35 years ago, it debuted in theaters. Sarah was 8?
No, I was like 89. I was 5.
You were 5. Okay.
Right.
So
I had just turned 5.
Yeah, this is probably a huge part of your Disney fandom, right? Is this movie?
Oh my gosh. As a little girl who is not blonde, this was like groundbreaking. Like, oh my gosh. 1, she's a mermaid. 2, she's a redhead, which at the time I was a redhead because I was born with like strawberry blonde hair as it got darker and then turned to the brown it is now. But having a princess who was not blonde was like the greatest thing ever. I was obsessed.
So I'm going to let everybody in on a little secret. I watched this movie the whole way through for the first time last night. And I know that seems weird because people look at me and like I'm the ultimate Disney adult, right? Like childless, goes to the theme parks all the time, go to the theme parks by myself. I have a Disney podcast, for the love of all things holy. But I was never actually huge into the movies. Like I had the movies that I really loved, like Mary Poppins. I grew up loving that one. When The Little Mermaid came out, you were 5. I was 9. So yeah. I was just about getting out of that. I would get into a princess movie phase of my childhood. We were going to the theme parks while this whole thing was happening, but I just didn't always check out the new movies. To me, at this time, and we'll talk about this sometime in the future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was the jam.
That was I loved that movie when I was a kid.
That was my entire focus at this particular point in my life. But The Little Mermaid, for people a little younger than me, also for girls, I'm sure it was just amazing. But as I watched it last night for the first time, there were some things that I did notice that I think in hindsight maybe it's not as impressive as everybody remembers. And here's what I'm going to say. This isn't as controversial as it sounds right now, okay?
Okay.
So it starts the Disney Renaissance, which is officially The Little Mermaid, The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. And I think especially Beauty and the Beast the animation is so much better in those other Disney Renaissance movies that I was surprised at how of the 80s I found the animation. Would you agree at least on that?
No, that's totally fair. I completely agree that, yeah, watching it now as an adult and like watching with my son and things like that, it's like, yeah, but it was also kind of the beginning of that, I feel. So the animation, it's like with even now watching, I mean, watch Toy Story now. And when that was like mind blowing animation. And now you see like the newer Toy Stories and you're like, ooh, that's choppy. Like, oh my gosh. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, yeah, but I completely agree with what you're saying.
Well, and as I mentioned, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, there was definitely an elevation here, right? They split the risk with Who Framed Roger Rabbit by working with Warner Brothers and some other places to mitigate the cost, mitigate the risk. And then that made a ton of money.
Yes. And
while they were working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they were working on The Little Mermaid, a budget of $40 million, a box office of $235 million. So while this might not have been the most technologically advanced of the Renaissance animations, it helped fund the rest of them. Like, so they were able to take that almost $200 million and fund those other Renaissance movies. So yeah, they are going to have better animation. I think the big thing about The Little Mermaid that we have to discuss first and foremost, and I think why it was successful, is one lady, and that's Jodie Benson.
Oh, absolutely.
I think if they didn't luck in to finding Jodie Benson at the right time to be the voice of Ariel, I don't know if this takes off in the way that, like, that might be that one butterfly effect moment.
Mm-hmm.
Picking her to be Ariel that set off the entire Renaissance. So as somebody who knows way more about this, as somebody who was in musicals, who goes to musicals all the time, explain why Jodie Benson is so much better than some average person that they could have gotten to play this character.
Well, Jodie Benson is just, in my opinion, I mean, she's fantastic. And she has this very distinct voice for Ariel, where, like, there's other actresses who voice other princesses and things and multiple other characters. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, Jodie Benson, it's like you hear that woman speak and you know, oh my gosh, that's Ariel. It's not, well, is it Ariel or is it this person? Or is it, and her, even to this day, I mean, how many years later, she still is just like iconic as Ariel. I mean, she replays her character. I mean, she's played Ariel again in the Wreck-It Ralph movie, the second one. She played Ariel again. She does it in the Disney Dreamlight Valley. So she's able as this actress to carry on even over all of this time, to be able to carry out this classic character without anyone being like, oh, she's getting too old for that. Or, oh, like, you know, actors at some point, you know, you're like, okay, you're just pushing it at this point. Like, you just need to stop, where she never has been like that ever.
I'm just doing quick math in my head, and she was in her late 20s when she voiced Ariel. I think so, yeah. Yeah. And, or she might have even been in her early 30s. And she sounds like a 16-year-old girl when she sings.
Oh, absolutely. Even when she speaks, she sounds like a 16-year-old girl. It's not like a 30-year-old woman who's trying to be 16.
I think one of the examples, and my favorite Disney princess is Merida, but the voice of Merida is done by somebody who's very obviously an adult. And even though she's playing a teenager, she sometimes sounds more adult. And here, she was trying to play a naive teenage girl, and she pulled off the sound so well. Not just, like, I'm not talking, I don't know music voice. Like, I'm not an expert there. Two of my favorite musical artists are Bob Dylan and Eddie Vedder. So voice is not voice is not a big deal for me, right? But I do know voice acting and how to, present a voice in the speaking roles, and she just nails that so well that I really think the whole crux of this movie and the entire reason it was a success was because of her.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, of course you have like Pat Carroll, who played Ursula, who is absolutely iconic, and Samuel E. Wright as Sebastian. And so you have such an amazing group of people that have come together, like voice actors and actors doing voices, to create this movie, that they just worked off of each other so well as well. It's not just like, oh, you threw all these crazy people together to create a movie and it's like, oh, it was cute, but
I do not want to diminish the work of any of these other voice actors. Like, they all did an amazing job. Absolutely. Pat Carroll was great. I just think of, did you ever see the documentary The Last Dance about the Chicago Bulls in 1998? Well, no. It's like a 10-part documentary series. And yeah, like, we can talk about Scottie Pippen, and we can talk about Dennis Rodman, and we can talk about all these people who played a part in it. But Jodie Benson is the Michael Jordan that if she's not there, it doesn't work, right?
No, it wouldn't. It's like thinking about, okay, if there was someone else doing that voice, would this movie have worked as well? And it's like, probably not.
So I want to now move on to talking about Ursula a little bit, since you did mention Pat Carroll doing that voice. And Ursula is not the first, but probably the most prime example of Disney queer coding villains, and then having these villains become like icons in the gay community because they have been so queer coded. I mean, Ursula is literally based on the drag queen Divine.
Yes, I was about to say the same thing.
And what is it about, and all of the Disney Renaissance movies kind of did this. They created these iconic villains that even though you're rooting against them, they now have this underground cult following. And it really started with Ursula.
Oh, absolutely. And it's pure camp. Like, she's scary as all get out when you're 5 years old. But watching it as an adult, she's so campy. And like you said, she's based on Divine. And Divine was she was controversial as well, due to some of her John Waters movies. But ultimately, it's like that character is so campy. It's kind of like Gaston, super campy. And it makes it so entertaining. And it was just perfect because, yeah, you don't like them, but at the same time, you're like, I kind of like them. And her songs are so catchy, and it's just like she has her sidekick. Yeah. And I mean, one of the parts as a kid that I was equal parts grossed out and fascinated is when she puts her lipstick on and she has the little like clam thing and she squeezes it. And then she's like her huge red lips. And I'm like, can I do that? Like, what could I use to do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the movies that really relies on a good villain. And that's something that the Disney movies have gone away from in recent years. I always thought you kind of can relate to Dr. Facilier, but some people say he was the last really evil Disney villain, because now you get these kind of reverse twists like Hans and
Right.
Frozen and some of these other things. Even with Moana, the villain's not really a villain, you know?
Right. And then when you come into like, not Coco, well, it is Coco is one, and they're tying it more to like family issues. So Coco Encanto, it's like, oh, the villain's the grandma. And then it's like, actually, there's a whole lot, it gets a lot deeper, where I feel like these movies, it's not as deep. It's like a shallow pool, and it is like villain, good guy. It's very cut and dry, where now they're getting deeper, I feel like, which I absolutely love newer movies. Because I'm trying to think too, like, when is the last time before Dr. Facilier that there was like a true villain in a Disney movie that was like bad guy villain? And off the top of my head, like, I cannot think of one. Because even in Wish, the king, like, he's the villain, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
racking my brain.
it's a trope, and Disney has gotten away from it. And I know a lot of people would like to see it return. They would like to see more of these classic villains. I don't know if maybe they overdid it during the Renaissance and maybe it is now primed to come back in some way. But I definitely think when they took a break from it, that was probably a good thing, because they were just essentially churning out copycat Ursulas. Like,
It's true, because it was like, let's see, then there was like Pocahontas, there was Ratcliffe, and he was camp as well. Like, whoo, that hat and his cute little dog.
oh, it was all of them. Scar, Gaston,
Yeah.
Ratcliffe. It was all this gay-coded villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Like, thinking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh. And I don't know who I can't remember who the bad guy was in Rescuers Down Under, but because it was the woman in The Rescuers, which was before, and whoo, with the big red hair, and like lived on the bayou and kidnapped the little girl Penny. And
But even the Hunchback of Notre Dame,
oh,
that was the
oh
same
my gosh.
thing.
He's scary. Like, he's like one that I feel he kind of falls into the same, but at the same time, he was just deranged. Like, that, he was deranged. When I see people greet him at the parks when he has meet and greets, I'm like, run.
And I'm even going to throw out James Woods in Hercules. Like,
Oh, yeah. As Hades.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Hades falls right in line with Ursula. Oh, right in line. Like, they should be buddies.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing the same character.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk not about who is the official villain in this movie. And as I watched this movie for the first time, I was able to say it, and I think this is true. Triton is just a jerk.
He is a protective dad, because this is also the time that there are no moms in Disney movies. Like, in all those, do any of them have a mom? No, except for Hercules, but he doesn't count because it's like his adopted mom. And his other mom's a goddess. So it's like, but he's a protective dad. He sees the error of his ways at the end. I mean, that's my view on it. I mean, I can totally see when he blows up the Prince Eric statue, like, yeah, that was completely uncalled for, but
But it's one thing,
I mean,
for him.
how many daughters does he have?
He's got 7, right? So calm down, bro. Like, no. I'm not saying that it's because he's protective. I'm saying it's because he just always seems to be wrong. Like, he just always seems.
Sebastian. If he listened to Sebastian, he wouldn't have this problem.
Well, see, maybe he should have listened to Sebastian. I don't know. I just felt that he was just always wrong in this movie. And if he would have, I feel like he created a lot of unnecessary drama that led to all of the events happening. But then again, then they wouldn't have happened. And they, sometimes the answer is, why did somebody do this? Is because the movie had to happen, right?
Right. But what about Grimsby? Do you think Grimsby is a villain character? The one who looks after Prince Eric? Because he gets mad at him a lot too. Though he's a lot more subdued.
But because Eric is a prince and has all the power, like, I don't think he really has any impact. Like, Eric still just does whatever he wants. But I feel like Ariel is kind of, I guess what I'm saying is at the end of the movie when he's so happy that she's with Eric, and it's like, bro, the entire movie has been you trying to make this not happen. Like, why are you all of a sudden so happy about it? I don't know.
You know, that's fair. That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
So this movie was pitched to Walt Disney Studios chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg when he was there, and he initially declined the movie because of its similarities to the 1984 Tom Hanks movie Splash.
Oh, I forgot about that movie.
And they were talking about doing a sequel to Splash, and they didn't want the sequel coming out at the same time as The Little Mermaid. Could you see if they would have skipped The Little Mermaid to do a sequel to Splash?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Just on an interesting side tangent, the reason that they called Splash Mountain was because Michael Eisner wanted to cross promotion with the movie Splash, even though Splash Mountain wasn't based on that movie. Right. Like, what was it about this movie that they thought was so important? Like,
oh my gosh, because it's Tom. Could you imagine if Splash Mountain though was like themed after Splash instead of after Brer Rabbit, and there's like Tom Hanks in there?
Wouldn't surprise me at all. We're very close to getting a Tom Hanks animatronic at some point, I am sure.
I hope so. I love him.
I think eventually he's going to voice a change to Carousel of Progress, if not to Spaceship Earth.
Oh, that'd be good. That'd be good.
I just couldn't imagine them passing up on this movie. Like, this was so crucial to the start of the Disney Renaissance, and I don't think anything that came after it would have. Even just the idea that Michael Eisner was saying, well, what used to be successful for us? Princess movies. Well, why did we stop making princess movies? And nobody had an answer for them, right? I don't think a lot of people who are younger than us really understand what the Disney Dark Ages were like. And even though some people go back and watch those movies now and say that they like them, and they are not lying, like some of those movies are good movies, but they don't understand how culturally irrelevant Disney had gotten at the time. So while they almost passed up on The Little Mermaid, after it made almost $200 million more than it cost to make it, they weren't going to let that go to waste, and they made a sequel, The Little Mermaid 2, Return to the Sea. Now, unlike a lot of the other Disney sequels from the time, they actually got Jodie Benson, Pat Carroll. They actually got a lot of these people to return for the sequel. And in it, Ariel does something that, to the best of our knowledge, none of the other Disney princesses would go on to do, and that is have a child.
That's
now,
right.
I have not seen this, but you have seen Little Mermaid 2. I know it's been a while, but what are your thoughts?
To be completely honest, I don't remember a lot of it. I remember that Melody, who's the daughter, looks exactly like her dad. The dark hair and everything. And to me, it feels like it was just so much of, from what I remember of it, so much of the same kind of story as The Little Mermaid, but instead of her rebelling against like her dad, it's her mom. And yeah, but like I said, I do not remember a ton of that movie because I was never really into the whole Eisner sequels thing. Like, I love the originals, but even as a kid, I was not into that. Though, fun fact, the woman who voiced Melody is actually a voice of one of the Powerpuff Girls. Actually, she does a lot of character voices, but yeah, I was not into the sequel movies. I just was like, this is straight to VHS.
So you mentioned the Michael Eisner sequel era, and he did like to pump out these sequels to all of the Renaissance movies. But this one, as the first one, it feels like they did go to the effort of getting the original cast.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like they actually put in the effort. I mean, this is 2000, so it's well after the debut of The Little Mermaid. But going back and being willing to get the original cast, and it seems like they put a lot more effort into this one, and it also feels like this is, of all of the Eisner remakes, the one that is the most fondly remembered by people who are just average fans.
Yeah, one thing though that is different about bringing back original cast, Pat Carroll didn't play Ursula in this movie though, because Ursula was destroyed basically at the end of Little Mermaid. She plays Ursula's sister Morgana, who is, I believe it's her sister, or it's somebody who's related basically to that whole thing. So it's kind of cool they brought Pat Carroll back to play the villain, but it's not Ursula. So so that is kind of weird.
And yes, Morgana is Ursula's sister, correct?
Okay.
So people might be thinking that we're on the first episode and we've already talked about the movie and the sequel. How could this be a 2-episode conversation? Well, we still have to talk about the live on stage version, the Disney on Broadway version of The Little Mermaid. Obviously, we have to talk about the 2023 live action remake. We have to talk about
the 2019 Little Mermaid live on TV.
Yeah, the ABC version of Little Mermaid Live, which you saw that. And right now I want to end this first episode by talking about the ride that you can find at both Walt Disney World and at Disney's California Adventure. And this is not an e-ticket attraction. This isn't Space Mountain. It's not Rise of the Resistance. But what this ride does is gives you a very good, solid, original Disney-style Fantasyland dark ride, even though it's not in Fantasyland at DCA, that never has a really, really long wait. I mean, if it has a long wait, then that means everything in the park has a long wait. Usually you can get on this in 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
At Walt Disney World, it has a great queue. It does a good job of telling the story. I think this is an underrated ride because it does everything a dark ride should do. It's an omni mover. It eats crowds. It shows you the movie. It gives you the songs from the movie. There's nothing more you could want.
Ursula's head falls off from what I've seen.
Occasionally Ursula's head falls off, but besides that, come on. I'm trying to be positive in this episode.
It is positive. It's hilarious.
So why don't you talk about the ride a little bit? Because I know when we were on the trip in 2021, you really wanted to do it because it's one that you like to do every trip. And even though it's almost identical to the one at Walt Disney World, I still wanted to ride it. So why don't you talk about the ride and what you love about it?
So the one at DCA, it's kind of hidden. If you didn't know it was there, you'd probably walk past it about 10,000 times. But I love, one, that it is a nice air-conditioned ride, that you are on an Omnimover, and that it's so cute when you walk through the queue, and it's kind of like, oh, you're kind of at the docks to like get on your, what are you riding, like a clamshell? Is that what that is?
Yes. Well, you're riding some sort of shell. Yeah.
Clamshells. But I love that it's completely family friendly. It's something nice to get you out of the elements if you're tired, because it's pretty long. Because like you said, it covers pretty much the whole movie. And so you get to go through, and it's something that it's chill and it's fun for everyone to ride together. It's something that if you just need a break, it's a great ride for just a break.
One of the things I love about the ride is you mentioned that you're riding some sort of seashell, and when you plunge into the water, you're going backwards and you watch
right.
the bubbles go up the shell in front of you, or I guess behind you technically,
Yeah.
because you're looking backwards. But one of the best parts of that is as the bubbles are going up and you are going under the water, the air conditioning kicks in like crazy.
That's right. Because yeah, you're underwater, like you're underwater for the whole ride, I totally forgot about that part.
It feels so good.
Well, and especially if you're riding it in Florida when it's like hot all the time. In California, it's like, okay, part of the time, but yeah, no, that's awesome. And I love all the little animatronics of like all the fish. It doesn't just show you like, oh, Sebastian, and here's Ariel, and here's Flounder. It's like when they go into all the songs, there's all the fish that you see in the movie during Under the Sea are somewhere in that room.
There are a lot of animatronics in this dark ride. It was part of the new Fantasyland expansion in Walt Disney World, and they really didn't cheap out on it at all. The outside is beautiful.
It's so cool. It's so cool outside at Walt Disney World.
The queue is really, they expected it to have longer lines, I think, because the queue is prepared to hold like an hour, hour and a half line. And it's air conditioned. There are waterfalls. So it's definitely designed to keep you cooler on a hot day at Walt Disney World. And I just think it was the perfect addition to New Fantasyland. Sarah, thank you so much for being back on the show. We have missed you, and your laugh has definitely made everybody happy. I'm declaring it now, even though I don't know for sure.
Well, thank you. And I'm super happy to be back. I know I've had a lot going on, so I'm super happy to be back, and especially chatting about this movie that is so dear to my heart.
As we mentioned, The Little Mermaid was the movie that marked the start of the Disney Renaissance, which took place under Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. I think some of the changes in the Disney parks over the past few years have gotten people to look back on Eisner's time as the head of the company in a more favorable light. In fact, I think a lot of diehard fans may have overcompensated and have started treating him as a creative force almost on par with Walt Disney himself. Starting next week, I'm going to be producing a series of podcast episodes with one airing each month about Michael Eisner. Somewhere in his 2 decades in charge of the company, we can find a happy medium between the Eisner stans, who seemed to trumpet every decision he made, and the very real mistakes which saw his tenure come to an end so the company could be handed over to Bob Iger. Next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty, we will look at the ways Eisner's early life was almost the mirror opposite of that of the man who created the company, Walt Disney. Until then, have a great week.